Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot daf Yud Zayin. We are deep into pigul, if you haven't noticed, just like in Zvachim. In fact, we're going to see the next Mishna, we're going to finish the chapter, and yet we're still going to be in pigul. On second thought of Rabbi Yafi Clymer, the shir went up this week, specifically called on the power of thought. So if you want to have more to think about on this topic, you can listen to her shir. Okay. We're going to get started. Today we're going to start with something. I want to just warn you before we get there that it's you're going to be very surprised because we seem to have learned not the case earlier in the chapter. So don't worry. This is an opinion. This often happens in the Gemara where they kind of state something as if it's obvious and it's what everybody thinks, and then all of a sudden you see that it's actually a subject of debate. So Amre charifei Pumbedita, the sharp ones in Pumbedita, which if you remember, I don't know if you remember this, but in Sanhedrin, Daf Yud Zayin, there was a whole daf that gave you or was a half an amud, that gave a list of every time you see charifei Pumbedita, it means this, and every time you see this, it means that, and Amre Rava, that's Rabbi Yirmiyah. And so charifei Pumbedita, there it says, and Rashi reminds us in case you didn't remember, and he even says it's in Sanhedrin, Daf Yud Zayin, Amud Ifa ve'avimi, or Efa ve'ravimi, b'nei Rechava, the Pumbedita. Okay, the sons of Rechava, Efa and Avimi are the charifei Pumbedita, and they say the following: Haktara mefagelet haktara. Okay, what does that mean? If you have a thought while you're burning the kometz, let's just assume it could be the levona also, but while you're burning the kometz, that you're going to burn the levona out tomorrow. Okay, that creates pigul. Now, what's the problem? Didn't we learn ein matir mefagelet matir? Okay, you might remember, you might not, but on Daf Yud Gimel, okay, we had Rabbi Yossi's opinion, and on Yud Gimel Amabet, we said, where did you get Rabbi Yossi? The laktir levonatan lemachar, he says it's pasul ve'en bo kareit. Rish Lakish says it's because ein matir mefagelet matir. Okay, so this obviously disagrees with that concept that ein matir mefagelet matir, or maybe at least in a particular case, we're going to see. Okay, why this case would be possibly different. And they don't even relate directly to this issue of ein matir mefagelet matir. That's what I wanted to say, because you're going to say, wait, didn't we learn that's not the case? So, what does it mean, ein matir mefagelet matir? Let's just talk about the mincha again. Normally, the classic case of pigul in a mincha is you're being kometz the mincha to eat the shirayim, because the mincha, the burning of the kmitza, and the burning of the levona, and that's where we got into the whole topic, which is our topic now of matir, you would have to have pigul, if you hold by that, right, the rabbi's position, you would have to have pigul when you were burning the kometz and pigul while you're burning the levona. Both times you have a thought that you're going to eat the shirayim, which is the davar shehutal, it's the item that's permitted, right? Usually the pigul machshav is during the permitter, and then the thought you're having is about the item that's going to be permitted, and you're going to either burn it, right? Either it becomes permitted to burn. In this case, it becomes permitted to eat, and you're going to eat it beyond the time. This is, I have a thought while I'm burning one that I'm going to burn the other, chutz lizmano. Now, there's two issues here. Number one, ein matir mefagelet matir, and number two, which the Gemara is going to bring up, ein mefagelin b'chatzi matir, right? Isn't it a problem that I only had the pigul thought during one of the matirim, not during both? And according to the rabbis, it wouldn't be a problem. But right, that would be, right, that wouldn't be pigul. Meaning it would be a very major problem because it would create a pigul situation. So afilu l'Rabbanan da'amre ein mefagelin b'chatzi matir. Now, even if you're the rabbis and you hold, well, there's no pigul in a chatzi matir, and all you did was half a matir here. Hanemile hecha dechishe be'b'shirayim u'levona b'milta kaima. In a classic case of pigul, that would be true. That ein mefagelin b'chatzi matir if you only had your thought during the burning of the kometz. Why? Or only during the burning of the levona. Why? Because while you were thinking, while you're doing the action of I'm burning the kometz, you had a thought about eating the shirayim outside the time. And nothing about what you did related at all to the levona. That's what it says here. I'm going to read the words. That's when you're chishe vehe b'shirayim. That's when your thought was about eating the remainder. And the levona b'milta kaima. And the levona remained in its thing, which really means it was untouched. Right? The levona, you didn't make mention of the levona. That's when we say ein mefagelin b'chatzi matir. Ein mefagelin b'chatzi matir means you can't say it's pigul when you completely had nothing to do with that levona. There was nothing in your thoughts and your actions that had anything to do with it. Aval hacha dechishe rabba levona kema dechashavle b'kulei matir dam. But you included the levona here in your messed up thought, right? In your pigul thought. Now, it's true, it's not on the same side of the equation it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be in a typical case that while you're burning the levona, because it's the matir, you have a thought about something else. But since what you did in this action was, and again, this is just the charifei Pumbedita, we're going to see that Rav Hisda disagrees with this, and again, this disagrees with the ein matir mefagel et matir that we learned earlier. The Gemara is not even relating to that, because we're going to get to Rav Hisda soon who's going to disagree, but it seems they have a different approach. They think, number one, matir can be mefagel matir, and this isn't a case of mefagel mechatzi matir, because you are including the levona in your situation. You're not burning it, but you're talking about burning it or thinking about burning it. So that already brings the levona in. So now you've already related to the burning of the kometz, which is half the matir, and the burning of the levona in your thoughts, which, right, the burning of levona, the kometz you're actually doing. The burning of levona is in your thoughts. That already means that you've included the levona, which then messes it up and creates a pigul situation. Even the rabbis who say normally you wouldn't be b'fagel and chatzi matir in this way, this case you would. Okay, Amar Rava. Now Rava is going to try to prove this. We're going to have the exact same structure in the second part of this sugya. We're going to have two opinions, the charifei Pumbedita versus Rav Hisda in the name of Rav, who's going to say this doesn't work. What we just said, it doesn't work to do pigul. This isn't going to be a pigul situation, which means actually, again, doesn't work means it's not pigul, which means it's actually fine. The korban is perfectly fine. But they're going to then, each time, one time it's Rava in our sugya, the next sugya is going to be Abaye, is going to bring a proof from a Mishna. Okay, so now. And then the proof from the Mishna in both cases is going to be rejected, so you know the structure. Amar Rava, Afana nami tanina. We can see this from a Mishna, that haktara mefagelet haktara. How so? Remember, it means that I can have a thought about burning. While I'm burning one thing, I have a thought about burning something else. That would be pigul. How do we know? Well, it says zehakla. Okay, this was back on Daf Yud Bet. Kol kometz v'notem b'kli v'amolich v'maktir. There were four actions: taking the kmitza, putting it in the vessel, walking it to the altar, and burning it. Le'echol davar. Now, there were four actions, but really it's 8 actions because each one of them, either you had your thought le'echol davar shedarko le'echol, right, while you were doing one of those 4 actions, you thought, I'm going to eat something that, right, like the shirayim, for example, right, beyond their time. Or, ulahaktil davar shedarko la'aktil. In each of those 4 actions, okay, you have either you thought to eat something or you thought to burn something. Well, now you can figure out what the issue is. If in all 4 actions, right, if these are 8 cases, right, so basically what are the 8 cases? Your kometz lechol, or your kometz laktir, and you're putting in the kli with the thought you're going to eat or burn. Okay, keep going down the list. You get to maktir. You're burning either to eat or to burn. What do you see? Burning with the thought to burn is a problem. Now, what else are you burning, right? It's not to burn the shirayim. They're not worthy of being burnt. They're eaten. So the only thing to burn is the levona, and there you have it. Haktir, levona, right? The haktir and laktir. An action of laktir with a thought about burning. So now let's just read it inside. So again, so it's either one of those 4 things, either le'echol or laktir. Chutz l'mkomo pasul ve'im bo karet. If your thought was, okay, this is just the rest of the Mishnah. If your thought was you're going to do it outside the right location, well, that's disqualified, but it's not karet, because karet in the Torah for pigul is specifically chutz l'zmano. So chutz l'zmano, pigul v'chayvim alav karet. And then you'll get karet. That's the end of the Mishnah. So now they say, my love, do not read this Mishnah. I'm going to say it in my words, as 8 cases, right? Each of the 4 avodot with 2 possibilities for each one. My love, haktara dumia dahanach. Isn't haktara no different than the first 3? And mahanach, now the first 3 for sure apply to both le'echol and lahaktir. Bein le'echol, bein lahaktir. Af haktara, bein le'echol, bein lahaktir. Okay, they're basically saying what I said before, but they're doing it in a bit of a different manner. What they're saying is, if with the first 3, the achila and haktara apply to each of the 3, and you could come up with 6 cases from the first 3, obviously the 4th case is also going to be both those cases. Okay, it's another way of saying the same thing. To which the Gemara says, no, you don't necessarily have to read the Mishnah that way. You could say, Hanach, the first three are bein le'echol, bein la'aktir, because they actually would be true in all those cases. But haktara le'echol, in la'aktir lo. But if you hold ein haktara mefagelet haktara, like we saw earlier, because ein matir mefagelet matir, and saying while you're burning the kometz that I'm going to burn the levona tomorrow is not pigul, then you read the Mishnah as, yeah, the first three are bein le'echol, bein la'aktir, right? There was no other way to really say it, but the last one is obviously only relevant to the case it's relevant to, and that's to eating and not to burning. So that Mishnah didn't really prove it. Now we're going to get to our second opinion. As I said, the structure is going to be identical. We're going to have an opinion. We're going to have one little side thing that didn't appear in the first one, which is just about who said this. Did you say this in the name of Rav? And the answer is going to be yes. And then we're going to have the attempt to prove it from a Mishnah, which is actually going to be the Mishnah that we're in right now. And then we're not going to be successful because we're going to say you don't necessarily, the comparison between those two cases isn't really a fair comparison. Okay, so now we're going to go to the second opinion. Yativ Rav Menachot bar Gada kamei Abaye. So Rav Menachot bar Gada was sitting in front of Abaye. V'yativ ka'amar. And Rav Menachot started to teach the following thing. Mishmei to Rav Hisda, in the name of Rav Hisda. And he's going to teach the counter opinion. Ein haktara mefagelet haktara. This doesn't work to create a pigul situation. Meaning your korban will be completely fine. If you, while you're burning the kometz, you say, I'm going to burn the levona tomorrow, that's not pigul. Va'afilu leRabbi Meir, you can see the structure is the same. Now he's saying, and even the one who says, mifagli machatzi matir, that you can do pigul in a half a matir, but, right, because remember, there's two issues here. On the one hand, you're only in one act of the two, but also, there's the other problem, which is a matir mefagelet matir. So even if you resolve the half that you're only talking about the burning of one of the items, and you're not, the burning of the kometz is only in your machshava, but even if you think that that's not an issue and it's going to be pigul no matter what, because we don't have that issue of chatzi matir according to Rabbi Meir, right? Meaning you will do pigul even if it's only in one of the actions. So you would think you'd be pigul here, but there's a different problem. Hanimile kometz matir didhu. That's only if when you're doing the kometz, the one action, the half an action, right, the half a matir, you're having a thought about the shirayim, the remainder, which is this is what I said before, the classic pigul is, I'm having a thought about, while I'm doing the matir, the permitter, about the item that's going to be permitted. And then you say, oh, but the item is going to be permitted, I'm going to eat it outside its time. And then it becomes pigul. But because the kometz is the matir ditu, the kometz is the matir of the shirayim. But that's not the case here. The kometz is not the matir of the levona. Remember, we talked about it before. You can burn the kometz when you want. You can burn the levona when you want. You don't have to burn one before the other. So it's not permitting the other thing to happen. In this case, kometz lav matir de levona, it's not the matir of the levona. And therefore, lo matze mefagel bei, and therefore it's not pigul. There's really two things here, okay? There's a little of a matir mefagel et matir is really based on this, which is a matir can't be mefagel another matir because the matir can only be mefagel, cause it to be pigul, to an item that it itself permits. And that's not a matir. A matir is a different item that permits something else. So it has to be, the item is permitting something that's the permitted item, right? That your thought is about the permitted item, that this matir is permitted. So Amar Abaye. So the first thing Abaye says is, Ane Mari Mishmei de Rav. Did this rabbi, you quoted Rav Hisda saying it, did he say it in the name of Rav? To which Amar Le'in, he says, yes, by the way, he said it in the name of Rav, and now the Gemara is going to further prove this from some other statement, Itmar Nami. Oh yeah, it was said, someone else recounted this, Amar Rav Hisda, Amar Rav, Ein Haktara Mefagelet Haktara. Okay, so that, like I said, is a parenthetical statement, which is just trying to tell you who was the source of this halacha, and it wasn't Rav Hisda really himself, he was quoting it in the name of Rav. Amar Rav Yaakov bar Idi Mishmei de Abaye. So now Rav Yaakov bar Idi comes in the name of Abaye and says, Abaye said, Af ana nami tanina. I'm going to prove this opinion of Rav from the Mishnah. How so? Shachat echad min hakvasim. We learned this yesterday. If you slaughter one of the sheep, of the two sheep offering, le'echol mimenu lemachal. Okay, this is not the case that's relevant right now. With the thought that you're going to eat that meat tomorrow, hu pigul v'chavero kasher. So you've ruined that one sheep, but the other sheep is completely fine because one had nothing to do with the other. Here's the important one. If while you're doing one sheep, you're slaughtering one, you have a thought that you're going to eat the meat of the other sheep tomorrow, shnehem ksherim. They're both completely fine. There's no pigul there at all. Why? My taima. Lav mishum de kevan de lav matir didehu lo matze mefagabe. Now I want you to notice, this is why I said there's really two things going on. Because this isn't really matir mefagabe matir, because the meat of the other sheep, the truth is you could sort of look at it, because you could say, well, one sheep can't mess up the other sheep, because that's a matir and that's a matir. But it seems like it could be that, but it seems much more so here. This isn't really a matir mefagabe matir. It's that these are two different things, just like the kometz and the levona are two different things. Burning the kometz is one mitzvah, burning the levona is another. They're two completely separate matters, right? There's the kometz and there's the levona. They're not the same. Likewise, the two sheep, they're two distinct units. There's the one sheep, two sheep. Their thought while you're slaughtering one, that slaughtering does not permit the other, just like burning the kometz doesn't permit the burning of the incense. So, the frankincense. So, basically, these two things are not connected at all. And what do you see? They're both kasher, right? There's no pigul there. So likewise here, there's no pigul. And that would prove ein haktaram b'vatelet haktara, because that's not its matir, right? The meat of the second sheep is not the item that's permitted by the slaughtering of the first sheep. There's no connection between them, just like the burning of the frankincense is not permitted by the burning of the kometz. And that's why, and that's your proof for Rav. To which the Gemara rejects this and says, lo, you can't compare the sheep to the kometz and the levona for one simple reason. Hatamhu de lo ikba b'chav mana. In the case of the sheep, they were never put together in one vessel, right? You don't put the bloods together, you don't put the animals together. They weren't ever put together in any way. Aval hacha de ikba b'chav mana ki chadamu. But the kometz and the levona were together in a vessel. Now I want you to remember when they were together. Be careful, because it's not really the kometz with the levona, but it's the whole dough. If you remember, we take the dough. Okay, let's just keep going through this process so you really remember how it worked. You put the dough in a vessel. Then you put the frankincense in that same vessel. Then you move the frankincense a little bit to the side when the Kohen goes in, puts his fingers in and takes the kometz out, because remember, you don't want any of the frankincense to get into his handful. That ruins it. So you move it over to the side. You put your hand in, take out the kometz, put the kometz in a new vessel. Now, in that vessel, they were never together. So it wasn't actually called the kometz when they were together. I just wanted to clarify that. But still, they were together in a sanctified vessel at that earlier stage. Because they were together in a vessel, they're more interconnected, and even though the burning of the kometz doesn't actually permit the burning of the levona, but you can't necessarily prove it from the case of the sheep, because the sheep are completely distinct, and these are together. So you might have thought, because they were together, that this could have worked. And therefore, right, the thought about while you're doing one action with the thought about the other might have worked to make it pigul, so you can't prove it from the Mishna of the sheep. And the commentaries actually say that this is actually the basis, part of the basis for the charifei Pumbedita. The reason why they thought that the burning of the kometz could actually, while you're burning the kometz, and you have a thought that I'm going to burn the levona tomorrow, the reason why it's actually pigul there is because they were together in the same vessel. And that's why in this case it would work. Okay, so the reason to reject the proof of the other is actually part of the reason for the proof for the other position. Okay, Amar Rav Hamnuna. Ha-miltali, okay, if you thought this stuff was not the most fascinating, okay, you're not going to really side with Rav Hamnuna, who thought this is like the most fascinating thing he ever heard. Okay, so he's going to now say, Ha-milta ivlali Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina ingrained this into me. Livloa is to swallow. Like he really ingrained this into me, so I absorbed it completely. Utkila leke kule talmuda. And it's tequila is like, not a tequila, it's shakula. Shin and taf switch in Aramaic, like tlat is shalosh. So shkula, it's weighed, okay, it weighs like mishkal, which is weight. If you put that opposite the whole Talmud, wow, this would weigh it down basically. This is or equal to all of the Talmud. Okay, what did he say that was so fascinating to him? Well, he said this line, Hiktir kometz, okay, first of all, just to confuse you a little, there's two different versions of this text that he said that was so fascinating to Rav Hamnuna. We're going to go with Rashi's interpretation. The Rambam has a different reading, and that's what sort of appears in parentheses possibly in your Gemara, or maybe it appears fully in your Gemara. We're going to go with Rashi. They both have difficulties, okay, like issues that are a little complicated for each one, but we're going to go with Rashi anyway. So this is what he said. Hiktir kometz, if you're burning the kometz, lahaktir levona, that's our case, to burn the levona, but also at the same time, so while you're burning the kometz, you say, I'm going to burn the frankincense tomorrow, and you also say, le'echol shirayim lemachal, and you're going to eat the shirayim tomorrow. Now the vav is missing. I'm just going to read it. Hiktir kometz lahaktir levona, le'echol shirayim lemachal. So it's a little weird, and later the Gemara is going to say, well, if it really is the way to read it, it should have said vav, but okay. So you had two thoughts. One is, I'm going to burn the levona tomorrow, and I'm going to eat the shirayim tomorrow. Pigul, that is pigul. So now they want to know, my kamash malan, okay, what's he trying to teach us here? I don't have a great answer for why he thought this was like the most amazing statement. Okay, you can think about it. If he wants to teach us like the charifei Pumbedita, that while you're burning one thing and you have a thought about burning something else, and that was what he wanted to teach us, then you should have just said that case and skipped the second part, right? He's trying to obviously say something by the fact that he's bringing us both these cases, both these thoughts. It's one action with two thoughts. Until now, we always say pigul, it's one thought. This is a case where the person had two thoughts, and if he wanted to just tell us the levona case, then he should have just said that. And likewise, if he wanted to tell us, and this is like a good review of the whole sugya, if he wanted to say, look, it's pigul, even if you had a thought during one of the matirs, like the burning of the kometz, then he should have just said the second part. He should have said the case of burning the kometz in order to eat the remainder tomorrow. Well, maybe he put them together because he wanted to teach you both. Well, lema, then he should have said, hiktir kometz, laktir levona, v'le'echol shirayim lemachar. He should have added the vav. Okay, this is not the strongest difficulty, and this is why people take issue with Rashi and have a different version, because it's not the most, it should have just had the vav in the middle. It should have said, to do this and to do that. So, Amar Rava de Rava, he explains, what's he really trying to teach us in this statement? Lo'olam, now we're going to have a complete reversal. Lo'olam kasavar ein haktara mefagel haktara ve'ein mefaglim b'chatzi matir. Actually, the reason why he brought both together is to say, in general, I don't think if you went with a matir, the kometz, in order to burn the levona tomorrow, that wouldn't be pigul, because ein haktara mefagel haktara. And if you had just said, I'm burning the kometz to eat the shirayim tomorrow, that wouldn't work either, because ein mefaglim b'chatzi matir. But what's the big chiddush here? Maybe this is why I thought this was so great. This is like a whole different way of looking at it, which is the machshava pervaded the whole mincha. Okay, that doesn't really mean what it sounds like it means. But what he's trying to say is, and again, it's a little hard to say this exactly how this works, but the idea is that let's take each issue separately. Normally, haktara would not be mifagel haktara. But here you had also the shirayim. So because you included the shirayim in your thought, that already makes it pigul. So it's already not the issue of ein haktara, mifagel haktara, because even though it wouldn't really be mifagel haktara, in this case, the mincha is going to be disqualified because you added the shirayim. And even though normally, if you had just had the shirayim, it wouldn't work because your thought was only during the burning of the kometz and not of the burning of the kometz and not the burning of the levona. But since you included your levona in your thoughts, since it came up later, right? It came up as, I'm going to burn the levona, so the levona was included, and the combination of those three things basically means that you're going to have pigul in this case. So even though in an isolated situation, if it was just the thought of haktara, it wouldn't work, and if it was just the thought of the shirayim, it wouldn't work, but the combo of all three things, where you're burning the kometz, you're thinking of the burning of the levona, and you're actually thinking about the shirayim, that enables all of this to actually be chal, to be placed, to all work, and you end up with a situation of pigul then. Again, enabling is a bad thing because now it's pigul, and if you eat it, you're going to get karet. Okay, last part for this chapter, before we move on to the new Mishna, the new chapter, Tani Tana Kamei de Rav Yitzchak bar Abba. somebody brought a braita. This is what they did in the Batei Midrash in the time of the Amoraim. People quoted braita. And sometimes there were issues with them. Okay, now we're going to learn a little bit about how you amend braitot and, what's allowed and what's not allowed in the world of changing braitot, or what's ideal and what's, we'll see. So he brings this braita, which was going to have a major problem. Hiktir kometz lechol shirayim. And if you got this sugya, then you're going to understand right away what this problem is. If you're burning the kometz to eat the shirayim, okay, tomorrow, okay, tell me what the story is. This is mifaglim b'chatzi matir, right? So is it going to work or is it not? Is dependent on the machloket Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. Because your machshavet pigul was only, right, this doesn't have to do with everything about, we learned today, aktar mefagel haktara. Just goes back to the basic machloket, is it pigul or not, if it was only during part of the matir you had your thought. So this is chatzi matir. So you'd expect it to say machloket Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. But what does it say? L'divrei hakol pigul. According to everyone, this is pigul. Okay, that makes no sense. The hambi flag pligit, but they argue about this. We've spent a whole, at least 2 days discussing this big machloket, mefaglin or mefaglin b'chatzi matir. And la'ema, so we're going to have to change it. L'divrei hakol pasul. What they want to tell you is, this is a topic we're going to deal with later today as well. When we say pasul, we mean disqualified, but usually there's no charifei. It means by rabbinic. Remember, we had the whole thing about the rabbis decreed in all these cases pasul. So it's by everyone. So even the rabbis who say it's not pigul if it's only in a chatzi matir still agree that it's disqualified. Okay, they're going to say this korban's no good. It's just not pigul. So if you eat the mincha, you won't get charifei for it. But it's not a good korban. So now the Gemara says, if you're already changing the braita, why don't you change it to say, leave the word pigul and just change l'divrei hakol? Okay, and why don't you just say, v'lema harei pigul v'Rabbi Meir hi? Why don't you just say, it's pigul, but it's Rabbi Meir's opinion. So they say, and here's the rules that, what's better, if you're going to change something, what's better? Change pigul to pasul, or change divrei hakol to harei pigul, right? And then say it's just Rabbi Meir's shita. So Tana divrei hakol itnu yoah. And as when he memorized this braita and learned it, and obviously messed something up in the transmission, but he learned the words divrei hakol, whether they were wrong or not, that's a separate story, but he learned the words divrei hakol. And pigul b'pasul mechalef le, harei b'divrei hakol lo mechalef le. Okay, this is just logical. You're going to change, first of all, pigul and pasul is a changing of 2 letters, right? You just have to, it's really 1 letter, because it's not even with a yud. It's changing the gimel to a samach, and especially if it's orally, it's just one, right? One thing. Pigul, pasul, that's it. But to change divrei hakol to harei zeh, this is pigul, and then you just say, well, it's only according to Rabbi Meir, that's already way more difficult to change. And with that, hadran alacha kometz tamincha, we finish our sugya and our parak. But like I said, we're continuing the same topic. So now we get to this Mishna that was actually quoted previously, and it's the exact same structure in Tzvachim, where first we get this whole thing about eating and burning. They don't go hand in hand, right? It's eating things that are supposed to be eaten, burning things that are supposed to be burning, as if everybody agrees. Then we're going to learn in the 3rd chapter, oh, by the way, there's a machloket about this. So, and we actually quoted this Mishna earlier when we were trying to understand the Mishna that didn't make sense. So, oh, maybe that Mishna is Rabbi Eliezer who disagrees. Hakometz et hamincha lechol davar she'ein darko lechol, laktir davar she'ein darko laktir, kasher. Okay, this Mishna is going to state a bunch of cases where it's actually kasher, it's not pigul, and it's not even pasul. It's completely fine. This is not pigul at all. Your thought is to burn something, right? While you're doing the kometz, for example, that's just an example. You have a thought that you're going to eat the kometz beyond its given time. Okay? That's eating something that's supposed to be burned. Or burning something that's supposed to be eaten. Or you say, I'm going to burn the shirayim, the remainder tomorrow, which is not supposed to be burned, it's supposed to be eaten. So that's completely kasher. However, Rabbi Eliezer posel, Rabbi Eliezer says this is disqualified. Okay, it sounds like he's saying disqualified, but there's no charifei. It's not really pigul, but it's pigul enough. Okay, we're going to deal with that at the end of today's stuff. Second case where it's kasher, and here we're not going to see machlokot. Lechol davar sh'darko lechol laktir davar sh'darko laktir pachot mikizayit. Even if you did it with, I'm going to eat the shirayim tomorrow, but you said I'm going to eat less than a kizayit of the shirayim, or I'm going to burn less than a shirayim of the, less than a kizayit of the, less than an olive bulk of the kometz, okay? That's kasher, because that's, you need a shear to, and the shear is kizayit. Lechol kachatzi zayit or laktir kachatzi zayit, she'en achilav kasher, she'en achilav aktara mitzrafin. Likewise, you can say I'm going to eat a kazayit, a half kazayit of the shirayim and another half a kazayit of the shirayim, that will come on. But to combine eating and burning and saying a half a kazayit of something I'm going to eat and burning a half a kazayit of something I'm going to burn, those two things don't combine because they're completely different. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is get the source for Rabbi Eliezer in the Torah. Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, my time of Rabbi Eliezer, what's his reason? Amar Kra, ve'im ha'achol ya'achel mibsar zevach shlamav, that's the pasuk where we learn pigul from. Ha'achol ya'achel is a double language. It really just means if you eat, okay? But it has ha'achol ya'achel, the eating word, in two different words. So b'shtei achilot ha'katuv medaber. From here you learn there's two achilot mentioned, two eatings. What are the two eatings? We've learned this many times. Echad achilat adam, echad achilat mizbeach. Eating is also consumption. So the mizbeach consumes the things that burn on the altar. So there's one is relating to the eating by a person, one is relating to the eating by the altar. Lomar lacha, kashem, this is to tell you, kashem shemachashvim b'achilat adam, kach mechashvim b'achilat mizbeach. Just like you can have a pigul machshava. The first thing we're going to learn is just like there's pigul machshava about I'm thinking I'm going to eat something beyond the designated time. There's also pigul. This is basic. We learned this many times. I'm going to also burn something. It's also going to be pigul. Okay, beyond its designated time. Ukeshem, and the second thing we're going to learn is shemechashvim me'achilat adam la'achilat adam u'me'achilat mizbeach la'achilat mizbeach. And since there's I'm going to eat something that a person normally eats, is what you're thinking, or I'm going to burn something there's something normally is supposed to be burned. You can also combine, so I'm going to eat something that's usually burned, you're going to burn something that's normally eaten. Okay, that combines as well. And that's Rabbi Eliezer. My time. So now how do you get the second thing, right? That was really only one thing. So how do you get the second thing? Well, when it's teaching you about burning and eating, how is it teaching it to you? By the words, hachol yachel. It could have said, hachol yaktil, or something like that, right? Why did it say hachol yachel and two? Both are referenced, even the burning on the altar is referenced by the word achila. So what do you see from that? That even if you use the language of achila and you say, I'm going to eat something that is supposed to be burned, that's going to be pigul. That's how he gets it. So now we have to deal with the rabbis. How did they read this? Rabbanan, haidaf kina rachmana b'lashon achila. The rabbis said the reason why it says in the language of achila is for some other reason. And they're going to give two possible suggestions. We're now on Amud Bet. Lo shna ki mechashe b'lashon achila lemizbeach, v'lo shna ki mechashe b'lashon haktara lemizbeach. If you say, I'm going to burn let's say I'm taking the kometz out right now to burn let me give an example with an animal. I'm sprinkling the blood now to burn the imurim on the altar. That's the classic case of burning, right? So my thought is I'm going to burn the fatty parts on the altar tomorrow. What if you say, while you're sprinkling the blood, that I'm going to have the mizbeach eat the portion tomorrow, eat the imurim tomorrow? Now, I'm talking about burning, but I use the language of eating. Is that pigul? And the rabbis say, yes, that's pigul. That's why, because sometimes people use the word achila, okay, also relating to burning. So if your pigul thought was in the language of achila, when you really meant burning, not I'm going to eat something, not I'm going to eat it, but the altar is going to eat it tomorrow, that will be pigul. That's why it's switched to the language of achila instead of saying burning. So they learned something different. Or, inami, what else makes, and this we saw in the Mishna, ma'achila, because afaktara, because how did we get to an olive bulk? An olive bulk, because an olive bulk is a classic measurement for eating, right? There's different shearing for different things. But for most eating, okay, there are exceptions to the rule, but for most eating, the shear is a kazayit. But burning, maybe the shear is not a kazayit. So how do we know the shear is a kazayit? Because of this comparison, how choyachel, it uses a language of burning and it calls it eating to teach you that the shear now it's a shear for two things. Number one, I have to burn something that's a kazayit in order, right? So if I burn less, it's not significant, right? We had the whole thing. What if I burn only a sumsum, right? Shumshum, a teeny bit. It has to be a burning that's a kazayit, and my thought has to be about burning a kazayit, okay? Just like my thought has to be about eating a kazayit. If my thought is about burning less than a kazayit, then it's not. Okay? And that's all learned from the fact that it's using the same language. Ula'olam, achila do'orcha mashma. But achila is really, right, its own achila, one second. kometz mizbeach v'shirayim la'adam, right? And achila just teaches you, though, that it's done in its normal way, though. In other words, achila isn't teaching you like Rabbi Eliezer wanted to say, that it's achila also of something that's burned and burning something that's also eaten. No. Achila is eating something that's eaten, burning something that's burning. Okay, so now we have one last thing in this ping pong, which is Rabbi Eliezer in Kein Lichter. So what's Rabbi Eliezer going to say? If it's needed to learn the whole issue of kazayid, or if you use the language like Rabbi Eliezer, obviously agrees with that as well. So how does he learn that and what he wants to learn? In Kein Lichter Rachmana im heachel heachol. Yinami im yeachel yeachol. My heachel yeachel. Why does it say? Okay, why does it have to say heachol yeachel? Why does it change it from a hey to a yud? And right, it's a different language. It's not just the same word twice, but it changes it. Well, shmat minatarte. From that shift, you can learn actually two things. Because if it just wanted to teach you what the rabbi said, it would have said he'achol he'achel or yachol yachel. Okay, so why does it say it like this? It teaches you both. Okay, our last section today is this question that Rabbi Zera asked Rav Asi. Amalei Rabbi Zera le Rav Asi. Now, if you're saying the reason for Rabbi Eliezer, okay, I assume this really should be Rabbi Asi. I didn't see anyone who says this, but Rabbi Asi was the one talking before. That's someone from Israel. Anyway, without getting into the details of the name, but Rabbi Zera probably asked Rabbi Asi. If the reason of Rabbi Eliezer is for that reason, now that means it comes from the Torah. If it comes from the Torah, then what would you assume? Karet nami l'chayev. If it's doraita, remember we said once something's by Torah law, it's pigul. Pigul means it has karet. What did it say in the Mishna? Pasul. Pasul sounds like no karet. And v'chite machinami, if you want to say pasul in the Mishna actually means karet. Hi atu da'amart mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan. You yourself said the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Modeh Rabbi Eliezer she'en anush karet. The Rabbi Eliezer, as much as he's strict here, he agrees though with the rabbis that there's no karet. You're not going to get karet in this case. You're only going to get karet if it's to eat something that normally is eaten and to burn something that's normally burned. But if you say, I'm going to eat something that's normally burned or burn something that's normally eaten, you won't get karet. So that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So what's the answer? Amar le, Rabbi Asi answers him, Tanaihi va'aliba de Rabbi Eliezer. There's actually a Tanaitic debate about what Rabbi Eliezer says. And what we're going to spend the rest of the daf doing now is trying to prove it from a Braita. Okay? Which in the end of today's daf, we're actually going to reject this proof from the Braita. But what we want to say is, there's a machloket, a Tanaitic debate about whether Rabbi Eliezer, okay, so what we see, pasul, right? So we're going to now say, well, pasul in one case, we're going to see pasul, right? Some of the rabbis think that pasul means pigul, okay? And that he really meant pigul. So, and when I said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that he agrees that it's not karet, that's because he was following one Tanaitic view. But there's a different Tanaitic view. We're going to try to prove that now. So, ikalaman damar psula deoraita, v'ikalaman damar psula derabanan. Some people he thinks it's Torah law, and some people think it's rabbinic law. And again, that would affect whether it's karet or not. Again, karet if you eat it later. Titania, here's the Braita. Hashochetet hazevach lishtot midamo lamachal. Okay, now we're going to get all sorts of cases where you're talking about eating something that's normally burned or burning something that's normally eaten. So while you're slaughtering the animal, you have a thought that you're going to drink its blood tomorrow. That's eating, because eating and drinking are the same. Something that's not, now, it's not really meant to be burned, but it's the same concept. It's supposed to go on the altar. Okay, it's poured on the altar. So you're going to drink the blood tomorrow. Or, now we're switching to the other case, lahaktir mi b'saro l'machar. Now the basar, the meat, is meant to be eaten. And your thought is, I'm going to burn the meat tomorrow. Or le'echol mi imurav l'machar. Or, back to eating, you're going to eat the imurim, which are the fatty parts that get burned on the altar, tomorrow. Kasher. Okay, that's what you would expect. Kasher. V'Rabbi Eliezer posel. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer disagrees and says it's pasul. Now, we don't know what this pasul means yet. Lahaniach midamo l'machar. Now we have a second case in this Braita. To leave the blood for tomorrow. Let's say you didn't say eating, you didn't say burning. Okay, this is already going to be more lenient because the Torah says ha'achol yachel. Now here you don't have a language of eating or burning, but you do have a language of something that's wrong. So while I'm slaughtering the animal, I have this thought that I'm going to leave the blood till tomorrow and I'm not going to pour it on the altar till tomorrow, right? But I don't say anything about putting it on the altar tomorrow. All I say is I'm going to leave it till tomorrow. Now that's forbidden. You have to deal with the blood that day and put it on the altar that day. So if I say I'm going to leave it for tomorrow, and here's where it gets a little tricky. we're going to have two new Tanaim that come in here. Rabbi Yehuda posel. Rabbi Yehuda says it's disqualified. And Rabbi Elazar, who's Rabbi Elazar ben Shammai, he's the Tana, not the Amora Rabbi Elazar. He's who we usually quote in the Gemara. We're now in a Tanaitic source. We're talking about the Tana, Rabbi Elazar ben Shammai. Okay, flashback this week is all about him, and there's an interesting story about him in tomorrow's daf. Stay tuned. So Amar Rabbi Elazar, Af Bizo Rabbi Elazar posel v'chachamim machshirim. So even in this case, Rabbi Eliezer disqualifies and the rabbis permit. Okay, right now we don't really understand much about the second part because Rabbi Yehuda said posel, and Rabbi Eliezer presumably disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda about something and says there's a machloket. So what Rabbi Yehuda is saying, everyone thinks it's pasul. Well, that's going to be difficult, and you'll see why in a minute. Because what did we say? L'haniach is obviously going to be more lenient than the first case because at least the same, if not more lenient, because there's no language of eating or burning in it. So, of course, it's less pigul than the other case. So that's what we're going to try to figure out right now. What's going on here? What they're going to try to suggest, ultimately, is that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar are disagreeing about whether Rabbi Eliezer says karet or not. Okay, but we'll get there soon. We have to connect a few dots before we get there. So the first question is Rabbi Yehuda liba deman. Okay, who's Rabbi Yehuda talking to when he says pasul? Right? He doesn't mention Rabbi Eliezer. He doesn't mention the rabbis. Is he talking within the rabbis? He's talking within Rabbi Eliezer. So based on what I just said before, if they're going to go with the rabbis. Now the rabbis, in the case where you said I'm going to eat something that's normally burned or burn something that's normally eaten, it's not pigul, right? It's kasher. So if you go according to the rabbis, where you said achila, I'm going to eat it tomorrow, which by the way means if you say I'm going to drink the blood tomorrow, that basically means also I'm leaving over the blood tomorrow, right? You're not only leaving it over, you're also saying you're going to eat it, and we say it's kasher, hachalo koshken, all the more so here where all you're saying is I'm leaving it, and you're not even talking about eating, of course it's going to be kasher. So it must be that Ella liba de Rabbi Eliezer. He must be talking within Rabbi Eliezer. I want you to make sure you're not confusing Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Elazar. Okay? Right now we're focusing on Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis, the debate we've been talking about since the beginning of the chapter. So now, so he basically says Rabbi Yehuda must be talking according to Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Yehuda must think that what? What do the rabbis say? Kasher. Okay, well now something doesn't make sense. If he basically is saying, Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Eliezer is posel and the rabbis are machshir, then comes Rabbi Elazar and says, Af bizo, also here, Rabbi Eliezer posel v'chamim machshirim, then they're saying the exact same thing. Now, it can't be they're saying the exact same thing because the Braita sets us up as if there's a debate between them. So that's what we're going to read right now. Ve'amar Rabbi Elazar, Af bizo, Rabbi Eliezer posel v'chamim machshirim. If so, Rabbi Elazar, hainu Rabbi Yehuda. They're both basically saying the same thing. Okay, it's true that Rabbi Yehuda didn't spell it out, that the rabbis permit, but we're assuming that's what he means. Rabbi Elazar disqualifies, the rabbis permit. Rabbi Elazar says exactly the same thing. They both disagree in this case as well. Same thing. So what must it be? There must be some difference between them. What must it be? If not, what we're looking for, karet. Elalav karet ikabenayu. Is it not that karet is ikabenayu? That the difference is about karet. Now, how will we read this? Okay, now here again, Girsa issues. You should read the Rabbi Yehuda instead of the Tanakama. De Rabbi Yehuda saval lahaniach psula ba'alma. When he says Rabbi Eliezer, or he doesn't say Rabbi Eliezer, but when he says the second case is pasul, what he wants to say is this case, Rabbi Eliezer says, is just pasul, only pasul, meaning, right, not karet. But behanach, but in the first case, what Rabbi Yehuda is coming to say in the second case is reflecting on the first. But in the first case, which is a more strict or a more worse case, because you use the lashon of achila, karet nami mechayev. He's going to actually obligate karet. And now look at Rabbi Elazar. What did Rabbi Elazar say? Bizo, af bizo. Also here means this is exactly the same as the previous. So he's going to say, Ata Rabbi Elazar lemeimar idi v'idi pasul ve'imbo karet. Also here he's posel, meaning both these cases are identical. And Rabbi Eliezer is going to say in both of them, pasul, but no karet. So, here's our Tanaitic debate. Rabbi Elazar thinks that in all cases, Rabbi Eliezer is only saying pasul, no karet. And Rabbi Yehuda thinks, no, not in lahaniach, but in the eating case, or burning, where you say eating or burning and just use the wrong item that you're eating or burning, it's going to be karet. And that comes from halchol yachil. So that's the attempt to prove. Here you see it's a machloket tanaim. That was Rabbi Asi trying to prove it from here. But the Gemara rejects this, and we're only going to start this right now. Lo. There is no karet according to everybody here. That's not the way to read what's going on in this Braita. Now, we thought there was just 2 Tanaitic opinions. There's actually 3, because there's Tanakama, okay, who we didn't really see before, that we didn't know there was a Tanakama, okay? And now we're going to just stop here, and we're going to start tomorrow with what Tanakama holds, what Rabbi Yehuda holds, what Rabbi Eliezer holds. So that's it for today. So we're going to, quick review, we had the charifei, Pumbedita, and Rav Hisda in the name of Rav, who disagreed about whether haktara of while I'm burning the kometz, and I have a thought that I'm going to burn the incense tomorrow, is that pigul or not? We saw the 2 approaches, and we saw that each of them thought this isn't related at all to ineffective matir, to that machloket in either direction, and yet one says it is an issue, one says it isn't an issue, and we discussed all the issues of a matir mafagel et matir, and how does it somehow work here, and even though mafaglin v'chatzi matir, how does that work here, and the difference between this and the sheep. In each case, we had an attempt to prove it from a Mishna and a rejection of that attempt. And then we saw the amazing statement that Rav Hisda was amazed by, the case where it's the double, and that basically precludes all the other issues and says, even if you hold that knot and that knot, but in this case where you're combining everything, it actually is going to be pigul. And then we had that Braita that we had to amend a little bit because it seemed to say everybody agrees that mafaglim b'chatzi matir, and that's not true. Okay. So then we went to the new Mishna, the new chapter, the new Mishna, where really we're dealing with this machloket Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbis, and what we did is first try to figure out what's the source of Rabbi Eliezer, that a thought about eating something that's normally burned or burning something that's normally eaten is pigul, or pasul, right? It's really pasul, and then we said, well, if you learn that it's pigul from the Torah, it should really be pigul, and you should get karet. So Rabbi Zera asked that to Rav Asi, and he said, and you yourself quoted in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that it's not karet, to which he says, well, those are machloket tanaim, and we tried to prove it's machloket tanaim, but now we're going to get to the rejection of that, and we'll see where the sugya takes us tomorrow. With that, wishing everyone a good day.